Hey everybody, it's David Matsumoto from Humintell. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I wanted to talk a little bit today about a new research article that we just published. It's actually a commentary about another research article that was recently published in the same journal. That original Target article actually did a study where the authors had shown expressions that were presented very quickly at 40, 120 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, and 300 milliseconds. And the researchers were measuring the brain waves or neurophysiological activity of the brain when the participants were observing or were shown those expressions. And one of the main findings of that particular Target article was that expressions that were presented at either 200 or 300 milliseconds had very different neurophysiological signatures than did expressions at 40 or 120 milliseconds. And thus, that one of the implications of that finding was that 200 millisecond timing seems to be some kind of a threshold for expressions to register in the brain. And actually, we wrote several of the various implications of those findings, one of which had to do with the fact that the finding that 200 millisecond expressions seem to be a threshold for recognition in the brain dovetails with the findings from research we did 20 years ago that showed that expressions presented around 200 milliseconds were identified maximally at chance levels with large individual differences. So it seems that 200 millisecond presentations are a threshold for people to start registering and labeling what those expressions may be. Also, that finding dovetails with other research that others have done that have shown that expressions under 200 milliseconds rarely occur, even in situations in which people are lying. Even in our most recent research, if you've been following our YouTube channel and and our blogs and whatnot, our most recent research also showed that expressions or microexpressions under 200 milliseconds did not occur very often, and that expressions that were under 400 or even 500 milliseconds started to differentiate truth tellers from liars. So all of this is kind of consistent with our contention that microexpressions should be defined in research as those occurring under 500 milliseconds. One of the main reasons why we do so is because other research, even 2 or 3 or 4 decades ago, demonstrated that the normal timing of spontaneously occurring facial expressions of emotion started at around 500 milliseconds or half a second and go up to 4 or 5 seconds. Thus, we thought that it would be best to define microexpressions as those expressions that occurred under that half a second or 500 millisecond threshold. So we define microexpressions as expressions as occurring under that half a second threshold. But you probably know for training, we recommend training to see microexpressions at 200 milliseconds or even 100 milliseconds, because even though it's faster than many expressions that we will see in real life, there's many, many benefits to training our eyes to see them at that speed, and we can be trained to see them at that speed. And once we see them at those speeds, at those faster speeds, we'll also be able to see expressions that are slower, as well as partial expressions and subtle expressions. So there's a lot of peripheral benefits from training expressions a little faster than they normally occur. And that's our thought about that recent research, and that's a summary of our recent article. If you like this content, make sure that you hit subscribe on the button below. Thanks a lot. Talk to you guys again. Bye-bye.